a program about the sea, the ship, and the sailor. And because where would the ship be if it weren't for the water, you know? And where would the sailor be if it weren't for the ship? And so we thought we would do this as kind of a musical voyage to explain to you, especially what sailors of the early time period of the 19th century and maybe even before that would go through to get their ships where they could navigate where they wanted to go, and maybe why they wanted to go there, and maybe how they wanted to go there. And so we're going to start off with a song that is a capstan shanty, and it's #1 on your little hit parade sheet. Now, we didn't print the entire song. We just printed the choruses to these because that's what the common sailor would be inclined to do when work was being done aboard ship. There was a fellow who was known as the shanty man, and he was just a common sailor who had, as the sailors would say, come up through the hawse hole. That's the hole where the anchor cable runs. But if you were somebody who came up through the ranks instead of going to Annapolis, for instance, then you're a common sailor. And the common sailor was an interesting character. He spent much time loving the medium in which he existed, which was being on the sea, and enjoyed the different kinds of weather, and enjoyed all of the hardships as well as the good times, and winds that took them where they wanted to go and winds that took them where they didn't want to go. So the first thing that happened in the life of somebody who wanted to be a sailor was that the ship had to get underway, and that term comes from the act of weighing the anchor on a ship. And the way the anchor was pulled up is there was a large barrel-like object that stood on the bow of the ship, and it's called a capstan, and it's basically a windlass. And so this capstan, which looked like a barrel, had slots cut into it, and the sailors would bring these long 6-foot pieces of wood called capstan bars and insert them in the capstan and commence to heave or push on these capstan bars. And as they did, the entire assembly would go around, and beneath the assembly was a common axle, really, and that would wind up the anchor cable to get the anchor off the bottom so the ship could run free. And the trick with anchors in the days before machinery did all the work for us was that the anchor cable was always slack when the ship was floating about. And to get that anchor cable up, the capstan sitting on the bow of the ship would be turned around until that line, that curved line, became a straight line. And the reason it was curved is because as the tide came in, it would raise the ship up. As the wind came in, it would move the ship to and fro. And so to keep the anchor from popping off the bottom, you always wanted a slack anchor cable. But to get the anchor off the bottom, then you had to pull that line tight. And then the anchor was over here, the ship was here, you had a tight line. You had to keep going around this capstan until the ship was above the anchor, and then that would pull the anchor up out of the sand. And now the men would still keep going around the capstan, and the occasional woman disguised as a man in those days, and the capstan would be brought around until that anchor actually came up to the cat's head, which was the long, like an 8x8, stick it out of the side of the ship, and then they would flip the anchor onto that cat's head, and the ship was now floating free. So we're going to teach you one of these songs, and because we have a select crew, a crew who was actually able to find their way to the ship, which always meant they were highly motivated. The words are printed out there for you, and we'll call your attention to the fact that you will notice that your part in these various songs on these various pages appears in italics. And a lot of people don't know this fact, but sailors always sang in italics due to the angle of the deck of the ship. You know, you were frequently going from port to starboard. So the way this one works, and what you have to do is imagine in your minds, because these songs are like time travel, and they take you back to people doing things that we don't normally do these days. We have machines that do them and so on. And a lot of people believe that all the technology that we have sometimes makes life so complicatedly technical that we lose touch with the actual thing that we're doing. And so this is one reason why the U.S. Coast Guard still uses a Coast Guard ship called the Eagle to train the men who will eventually be officers on these varied and sundry ships, because they feel like it makes them closer to the environment, closer to the weather, closer to the water itself, and closer to the crew, because everybody's working together instead of pushing buttons and typing and reading their Palm Pilot, you know. So anyway, enough preaching there. We're going to do this song, and it's an Irish tune, a great melody, and the way it works is I will say a line like, "Patty, lay back," and you will answer,
"Patty, lay back.
Take in the slack."
Take in the slack.
Yeah, taking in the slack. You all have had that term thrown at you. Hey, you know, give me a little slack. You know, it's a Monday morning. Take in that slack. You know. So take a turn around the capstan. Heave a pawl.
Heave a pawl.
About ship station boys, be handy.
Be handy.
And we're bound for Valparaiso, round the horn.
Round the horn.
Now the horn plays a great important part in most nautical dramas of one sort or another. It's the southern tip of South America. And on the western side of that southern tip of South America is this is where your passage actually, if you were going from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, you're going to be going up the west coast of South America till you get to San Francisco, for instance, if you have a ship that's taking you to the gold rush. And so the horn itself is a really wicked, it's the weirdest, strangest weather on the entire planet, because if you hold a finger right below South America, which means it's right above the Antarctic Peninsula, and you turn the globe around, at no time is your finger ever over anything but water. And so it's 360 degrees of water. And so when the wind builds up over that water, and because of the rotation of the planet, it's always coming from the west to the east. And so when you're sailing from the Atlantic into the Pacific, you're going against this wind. And that's what made Captain Bligh have to spend over a month trying to get around the Horn, the southern tip of South America, and he finally decided he was just going to go ahead and sail all the way around the planet to get to the place where he was going to get his bread.
A much shorter distance in the Roaring Forties than it would have been at the equator.
So we'll try that chorus. It goes like this. Patty, lay back, take in the slack, take a turn round the capstan, heave a pawl. All about ship station boys, be handy. And we're bound for Valparaiso, round the horn.
Round the horn.
Now Valparaiso, the best liberty port on the coast of South America, on the west coast, and everybody knows that when the going gets tough, the tough need to go shopping, right? And so these sailors were waiting to get, if you made it around the Horn, then Valparaiso was a great place to go, because that's where all the lovely pubs were and the lovely ladies. So the verses to this song are really exciting, because Sailor Jack was always in pretty bad shape when he got aboard ship. He had come the day before, he had signed his name or his X on the muster roll, he had gotten his first month's pay. That was usually meant for him to buy new sea boots, oilskins, good rain gear and so on, but in the sailor's tradition, he was required to go to the nearest pub and spend this small fortune before the ship sailed. So he came to the ship in pretty bad shape. So this is the therapeutic part. Sing the last word or phrase of every verse. Ready?
Imagine yourself trudging in a circle around the capstan. The only thing you can repeat after him is the last thing you heard.
It was a cold and frosty morning in December, and all of me money it was spent. And where I spent it all, I don't remember. So down to the shipping office I went. Down in the air there was a great demand for sailors. For the colonies, for Frisco and for France. So I signed aboard a line and marked the Hotspur. And then I went and spent the whole advance. Hattie lay back, taking the slack. Take a turn round the capstan, heave a call. All about ship station, boys, be handy. And we're bound for Valparaiso, round the horn. Bosun asked me which watch was my watch. I asked the bosun, which watch is which? And then he knocked me down and kicked me up the sternum, calling me a dirty, rotten son of a gun. Patty lay back, taking the slack. Take a turn round the capstan, heave a call. All about ship station, boys, be handy. And we're bound for Valparaiso, round the horn. Well, I woke up the next morning stiff and sore, boys. I knew that we was outward bound again. When the voice came a-hollering through the door, boys. Lay aft, my lads, and answer to your name. Well, it was on the quarter deck where I first saw 'em. Such an ugly bunch I never seen before. There was a bum and a stiff from every quarter, and it made me poor old heart so sick and sore. Hattie lay back, taking the slack. Take a turn round the capstan, heave a call. All about ship station, boys, be handy. And we're bound for Valparaiso, round the horn. Now in the old sea chest I had a bottle. And by the boarding master it was put there. And I needed something wet to oil me throttle. And something for to drive away dull care. So I fell down on my knees as quick as thunder. And I made my way to the bottom of the box. But what did I find to my surprise and wonder? It was just a bottle of medicine for the pox. Chicken pox. Hattie lay back, taking the slack. Take a turn round the capstan, heave a call. All about ship station, boys, be handy. And we're bound for Valparaiso, round the horn. Take a turn around the capstan, heave a ball.
Heave a ball.
All about ship's station, boys be handy.
Be handy.
And we're bound for Valparaiso round the horn.
Round the horn.
And we're bound for Valparaiso round the horn.
Round the horn.
Well, so that was the first stage of getting that anchor up. But the second stage was that once you had the slack out, then you had to pull the ship to the anchor. So we'll do a little bit of a second stage capstan shanty, because this whole operation took about 4 hours on a big, tall ship, like the one that you see right here, and some of these